The following program is recorded live and is not intended for children. It is intended for children's parents. This program may at any time contain dark and disturbing topics, graphic horror, depictions of all sorts of different other nonsense, nudity, undiagnosed mental illness, bigotry, hate speech, and other distressing topics that may be against the terms of service for most mainstream websites. The themes and opinions expressed in this disinformation campaign should be considered psychotic and should not be used for political purposes. Facts are not checked, and no sources or citations will be provided. Should you choose to redistribute without our permission, please do so only in good faith. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. Find out, by the way, how we got here, because I'm going to cut this part out and put it at the beginning, so you're going to hear that whole disclaimer, and then you're going to find out, how did we get here? Where is this place? What is going on? What? It's the best way to tell a story, show the beginning, show a little bit of the ending, or maybe a flashback, and then put the story together. It'll be fun. It's like a little moth of some variety. I like how camouflaged it is. I mean, obviously we can see because it's not camouflaged on the white, but... What kind of idiot just leaves their bike right there? It's craziness. Welcome back to Rainbows and Razor Blades. By the Gregorian calendar, it is currently September 2nd. Oh, I have the hiccups. 2022. And we're chilling. Well, I'll be back when there's something to film. Oh, damn hiccups. I don't really know exactly where the source of it is. I usually can discern why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling, but I'm just feeling so fucking anxious. I'm just really, really anxious, and I don't, it's funny, because the one thing I know that triggers that is, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, constipation, and just, right now I'm not feeling that, so I don't really know exactly what's up. I'm watching this car come this way. That has nothing to do with the anxiety. That's just in this moment I'm filming it, because what are they doing? Are they gonna really come this way? Oh no, I see. I was like, there's no shot. There's no road here. Well, just I can't get my heart rate or my breathing under control all morning. It's been like this, and I don't know what's causing it. I don't know what I'm thinking or feeling that's causing it. It's a lot. Weird ass bugs or something. Here, I'll blow. Watch, ready? Do you see them all? They're hard to see, but I swear they're there. They're invisible though. They're moving, I swear. You see them? You can see them a little bit. There they go. There's a bunch more that I was just sitting down, and so I started moving my stuff over, and all of a sudden a wave of these movements. Just what the fuck? Very, very strange. No idea what they are, but extraterrestrials maybe. So my law studies continue, right? Obviously I'm not out there just grabbing a camera and running off to go do First Amendment audits, but I'm fascinated by the principles of free speech, and mostly I'm fascinated on the architecture, that the decisions were made, that we legally predicate the decisions that are made all the way to the top. See, what's interesting, and what I've known for a while, but I just want to touch on it because it isn't something I've really touched on, is that two different judges, and this is going to sound kind of weird, two different judges can have completely opposite outcomes of a single case and both be correct. It's hard to explain how or why that is. And it makes sense when you think about it, because there isn't always an objectivity. There isn't always a standard. I forget her name because I just can't remember certain things. But I learned yesterday about this woman who won a Nobel Prize, and I think it was economics, which is a strange thing to win a prize in. And not to be sexist, but for a woman, I mean, it's truly groundbreaking. And she was, she's incredible. It's funny because, at some point, you're so smart that you're only hanging out with other smart people. I'm starting to get old. Got crow's feet or whatever. You're only hanging out with like other really smart people. And so you kind of lose track of what it's like to not be around people that just have like the same working architecture as you. And so you just like will use a term that like, God, it would probably take 3 hours of YouTube education just to catch up to the basis of the fundamentals that she was speaking about. And she had to define those fundamentals and create those fundamentals. And she spoke about how they made this possible. And I thought about the parallels of that because she was studying, she was like putting together different measurements from different fields of studies because the studies themselves didn't necessarily use the same symbols because they didn't necessarily measure the same things at the same scales. And from what the basics that I understood was, she like invented an entire way to categorize, and I forget the name of it, to categorize different systems based on different values that were identified as having commonalities with other systems. And so she basically proved that in a lot of the cases, quote unquote game theory, when you apply it, like the theory right now is that like people will be self-serving, but she found that communication opened up the possibility for better outcomes with like replenishable resources. And so basically what she worked to accomplish, she debunked the theory of the commons. Listen, I'm not here to debate. I'm not here to explain to you even what that means. I just wanted to illustrate an example. If you already know what that is and you're like smarter than I am and you're still listening to me, like, first of all, good on you. Second of all, thank you. Please subscribe on Patreon. But like, you know, the parallel to someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You know, the woman who, she had to go to the bathroom every 5 minutes. Boom. So, 2 justices on the Supreme Court, right? The highest court of the land. It can't go any higher. You could ask 1,000 people, but these are the best ones, allegedly, to ask, right? You could ask thousands of people to make a decision. And the consensus may be different than what these people don't even necessarily come to consensus on, but they kind of like vote on it, right? And there's a thing called the dissenting opinion. A dissent, sorry, it's hard for me to say. It's kind of like going down against. But you're like against it. You disagree with it. You are in the minority. So 5 justices say Miranda's rights. This is just as an example because this was a 5-4 case. Miranda, Arizona, I think it was Arizona. I think this was the 60s, but I don't really recall. This is not, don't, you know, check your sources. But the gist of it is that this dude named Miranda, you know, they violated the shit out of this guy's rights. But did they really? And that was the question. Because now they shit out of that guy's rights. Because you have to, there's a compelled speech component that the government has in a way. They don't have to. They won't themselves necessarily go to jail, right? If they don't, they're not like compelled to do it, right? But there's a policy in place, and for very good reason, that basically you really can't even gain a conviction, actually. Yeah, and if you do gain a conviction, you just can't bring that evidence in. But oftentimes it's to the point where that information sometimes can even nullify an entire arrest. Like, yeah, there's still a record that you got arrested, but there was no charges. And the charges couldn't be proved in court. And so lawfully, you don't have to tell, you know, lawfully they'll keep track of that information until you're dead. The government has a vested interest to know that. They have a vested interest to keep that information private. And the fact that they collect that information, it's impossible to tell them not to, even if it's unconstitutional to use that information in most policing circumstances. But that doesn't mean that, like, police adjacents can't actually use that information against you. It may be quote-unquote unconstitutional, but they can violate your constitutional rights until they're blue in the face. It doesn't give, there's no fuck is given. Right, the behavior of a private corporation can basically violate the Constitution because it's like quote-unquote private. It's only in the public where those two things can meet that the Constitution becomes so important. That, and to a lesser extent, but also kind of a wider extent, war and the prevention thereof. especially internal resolution conflict between what would otherwise turn into corporate or family or religious blood feuds. Because it wouldn't take long if you just said, like, you know what? That whole part about, like, you can't go shoot people. You can just go shoot people now. But only in these places. And, like, bet your ass, a bunch of people are going to show up with their armies. They're going to be like, how many Christian boys can we send to the death? How many good Christian lads can we send as racial soldiers to march against our enemies? Right? How many horses can we put to the battlefield with swords? Same people, same mentality, just different technologies, different written protections that we actually abide by and have it's like, in the moment, you can't necessarily stop them from violating your rights, right? And I'm actually more fascinated, I'm less fascinated so with trolls. I'm fascinated with them from both angles, like First Amendment artists. I'm more fascinated by, like, protesters, right? Like, where can the government crack down on protesting? And in what capacity is the protest unlawful? And to that extent, how come they don't make more mass arrests, right? What's the difference between 40 people blocking traffic and one nut job blocking traffic? I don't know. Are the police going to stop 40 nut jobs from blocking traffic? That's a political message. What if every day the same 40 people just march down the middle of the road? Sorry, officer. This is a First Amendment protected activity. They're like, no, people have to get to work. Sorry, officer. Can't help you. And they just keep on walking. Open fucking carry. Right? Now, in the commission of a felony, that would be unlawful and it would be an aggravating circumstance to that felony. Right? So unless they change the law, they can somehow lawfully codify by statute and penal options that otherwise they can't really justify it, because what are they really justifying it upon? Now, there may be loopholes. You may be able to find some way for you to constitutionally make the police look kind of bad because they accidentally just didn't close the door if you had a fishing pole walking from your car to the beach, right? And you're like, I'm just going to go walk in with my rifle. Okay, dude, we get it. We can't put you in prison this time. But what you did is against the public good, so we say to you. Which is exactly why he's doing it, to say it back, right? Second Amendment auditing fascinates me. The right to free speech fascinates me only insofar as it relates to how far the other side is willing to use the Second Amendment. Lethal or less than lethal force. More so a violation of the 14th and 8th. Because it's like, due process. This guy, they asked him, they made the officer look really stupid. He took the phone he took the call all arrogant and just got schooled and basically had to admit that he didn't even know the Fourth Amendment. It was kind of sad. You wonder how much of that is like propaganda versus how much is just like actual exposure of ineptitude. And I would say that it's like, you can find ineptitude if you look hard enough. And where that ineptitude comes into contact with the public, there needs to be accountability. And for the very, very, very longest forever of times, there's been no accountability. Or there's been accountability to corrupt factions that are now being exposed because they have to tip their hand that they exist to counter your spell. Because other Magic the Gathering players sitting at the table like, whoa. The fuck do you mean you're playing blue? You don't have blue land. You've been playing black. They're like, right, but I played 2 black to pay this spell that says counter your target spell. -5 life. Right? They have to pay that life. And that's how it's measured. Right? That's what the dollar represents. It's like, this is our way, this is our symbol for measuring our control force over life. Others can use a different symbol. This one's ours. And we use that against people, and we measure the time, right? Like Lady Liberty with her dress and her thing. Like, that's the image, but it's not really what it is. I mean, unless that's the woman who enslaves you, and like, I don't know, well, it might be. It might be. But there's also the institutional racism and stuff. There's stuff that's so flagrantly unconstitutional and corrupt that you know that the system itself is still bearing the chains of a different system, because if it abided by its own constitutional laws, well, realistically, I'm not so sure that they're, this far into the game it matters. But assuming that it did, and that it still does, Like, this trans stuff, man, I mean, if it was a larger percent of society doing it, which I think someday soon it will be, people who will be like multi-bots, there'll be different personalities in school, like, oh, in this class I'm Brian, but in this class I'm Dan, and in that class I'm Cody, and in this class I'm Alicia, and you can't stop me. You can't stop me. The teachers can call me whatever I want, or whatever they want. They can give me a D in participation, but they cannot force me. They cannot compel me to answer, right? They cannot compel you to answer. They can't. They cannot compel your speech. Any more than you can tell them that they can't say gay, that they can't talk about being transgender, that they can't take your kid aside in a capacity that should be reserved. Should be, is very alleged. But according to the people who are against it, and the system that actually could be held accountable to it, whether I believe in it or not, would be like a licensed therapist or clinician, right? Now say you have a transgender teacher who does, or thinks they do, know better, right? Do you really want that person safely to be able to take your child aside and say, hey, listen, have you ever tried, like, masturbating as a girl? You ever stick anything inside yourself? Because you could be trans, right? And that's a question that I would want asked with, and here's the problem. Here's the big problem. Trusted adults in vicinity to hear the question and understand that, kind of like their child's lawyer, they're in charge. Unfortunately. A lot of people are really stupid. A lot of people are extremely abusive and part of systems that have corrupted them, or that they themselves don't realize have corrupted them, and they're just evil people. And those people can really shape and change the dynamic of relationships of children to themselves. So where I'm going with all this and how all this ties together is, like, obviously I'm trans. Obviously I know the difference between, like, a limited form, for example. Like, the same way that you can't go up in the back room of a post office or into the middle school lawfully without, like, permission, basically, first of all, but, like, following protocol. Like, it's like you can't just expect that something is public just because you run up in there. You know what I mean? Like, if someone did a First Amendment audit at a school, they'd get arrested because there's no reason for them to be there. But the thing is that the stuff that they're saying, the things that they're doing, the kids have to fend for themselves and spy for themselves. And so soon, two things are going to happen. One, the children are going to be able to record anywhere, or they're going to get kicked out of school. The parents, there's not going to be a truancy system. There's going to be a church waiting for them in those parts of the world. It's terrifying, but it's the truth. The second thing that's going to happen, I mean, and there'll be churches of different denominations. Some will be more monstrous than others, but mostly they'll be Christians, and mostly they'll be good people. That's the truth. They'll be good people for the most of it. But it may preclude the existence of trans people. So it's like, how good are you really? How good are your people if they don't allow certain types of people to exist, or they're willing to, like, put their police officers into the classroom to remove the student who is just standing there, recording, not answering. They just do not answer. They say nothing. They just put their fucking cat ears on and they sit there. The news cameras will show up. If they've been there for, because they become a disruption when that bell goes off. The bell means something, right? But what force are they actually allowed to use? Can they physically detain the kid? Would they use handcuffs? And if so, to what extent? Right? What if it's an autistic child? What if it's a female? What if it's a small female? What if it's a small male that identifies as female? Is it unlawful if the police step in, kicking, boom, let me see your fucking hands. Sir, put the gun down. And it's like, excuse me. I use she, her pronouns. In fact, let's use ze, zer, and they and them. And that is not to demean ze, zer, or they, them. It's just that people think of it like, oh God, now it's gone too far. Be compelled to change clothing. They can write the detention. But then it's like, they can't compel you to change your clothes, can they? They can give you a demerit, or whatever it's called. They can write you up. But a teacher can write you up for anything arbitrary. It's not the law. Who cares? They can give you a detention. If you don't show up for the detention, what are they going to do? They're going to give you a second detention. Okay, so what? What are they going to do? Eventually, they'll tell the teachers, hey, they can't be in your classroom because we're actually suspending them now. So if they come to class, you have to send them in the office. Fine, okay, so the kid goes to the office. Then what? They sit in the office. That's the end of the railroad. Trust me, I've seen it. Trust me, I was a kid. I've seen it. I was autistic. I've seen the end of that. Of when you absolutely do not cooperate with any adult in any regard. But now I want to know what the actual law is. I want to train kids to be obstinate. I want to train kids to resist middle school so that they can fucking well survive it, and they can come after me for trying to teach their kids a different system. But it's not unlawful, and the parents have not only signed their kids up for this. First of all, they agree with me. Second of all, I'm not brainwashing them. And if their parents disagree with anything I say, they can tell their kids not to follow my direction. I'm not going to try to convince their kids that the parents are wrong, even if I think that the parents are wrong. So you can bring your waspy little kids, you know, and I'll preach to them about the opposite of what the bigots are preaching. Because if you've only ever heard one side of things, or you've heard the controlled opposition group that makes it sound to be, as people always will say, they're like, those fucking pedophiles actually I really heard this. Women with transgender children oftentimes are cat owners and they rape their cats. That's true. I can prove it. Here's an article, right? Just like the melodrama that spews out of these people to try to create the illusion of a soldier standing, or to try to create the illusion of a consensus being created, like, oh, me and you were on the same team, girlfriend. Turf's, it's a what are turfs, man? I don't even know. But, if they got their way to the very, very ending, they could round all of us up pretty easily. There's not a lot of us. But there will be more. And I see no reason why I shouldn't start teaching anti-public school sentiments. But it's not unlawful. People will really hate it. They will not like what I have to say. They'll leak me on the internet, and people will have to besmirch my character to try to destroy me. And they'll probably be quite successful, and people will find me notorious. But the people who actually realize and have known me long enough, who realize that I'm actually not notorious, I think eventually will win out. They'll have to fabricate stuff against me, unlawfully arrest me, do what they always do. Accuse, whatever they're gonna do, charge them with whatever the worst of the worst is. Espionage. It was espionage when Snowden leaked these completely unconstitutional programs that the people have an absolute right to know about. That not only doesn't threaten security, it does, but the knowledge of it. People are so brainwashed. All it did is prove how brainwashed they are. They're like, hey, this is an outrage, but we don't really understand it well enough to actually fight for it, so I guess you guys win. It's an outrage. You can't rain, you can't have thunder, you can't invent guns before our people. It's an outrage. We didn't have time to outlaw it. They'd already... Goatsy. You can't say that to kids. Warning. A moth to a flame. I would try to explain, but I'm going insane myself. Why don't you watch your own back? I'll watch my own health. Like a rat in a cage. I watched you try to escape. Now you're running their maze for cheese. Drop the pretense, it's a mask like murder on Halloween. Like a moth to a flame. Soon to die. Soon to die. Soon to die, soon to die, soon to die. By design, I decide. Genocide, step inside. Psilocybin of the mind. Twist and glide. Side to side. I forget how it goes. I think one of the funniest things that I'm going to do to be a bit of a pain in the butt, but mostly to be a good journalist, is I'm going to Mirandize people. Say the scenario is this, right? POV, I'm a troll, filming in the window of the bank, and you call the police on me. The police show up, they're like, sit on the ground. Turn that camera off, I'm not going to tell you again. That cop needs to be retrained. Sorry, that was 15 years ago, you could get away with that. It wasn't lawful when you did it then, but you could get away with it. You can't anymore. You just can't. Right? You can't order me to stop recording any more than you can punch my lights out, shoot me, tell me to stop thinking. It's the same thing. You can't tell me to stop writing. You can tell me, let me see your fucking hands, but you can't later then try to claim that this is a taser or a gun. Believe me, cops have tried. It doesn't work in court. It does not work in court. Right? And that's when they're on the defense, mind you, not when they're trying to prove whatever they're trying to prove about you. So I think it'd be hilarious because actually, when they're doing a law, it doesn't even matter if you're lawfully detained, actually. You kind of have to, like, if you're not detaining someone, then people may feel like they're not reasonably free to go, but they could just walk away. And most people don't realize that you can just walk away from the police. And a lot of the time the police, they'll check if you know your rights. There's really no reason for them not to try to do that. I think that it's unconstitutional, but I don't know if that necessarily makes it unlawful. Like if they one time say, no, you're not free to go, get back here. You say, am I being detained? Well, yeah, no, technically you're not being detained. All right, yeah, you are free to go. Have a good night. Hope you weren't the actual guy who did it. That'd be so shitty. That'd be just so fucking shitty. Right? That's not what they're trained to say. That may be how they're supposed to act, but it isn't really how they're necessarily trained. They're trained to sniff out the actual truth. They're trained to just like find what the problem is. If there's a problem, try to figure out all this different stuff. They don't really have time to always be correct. Right? And sometimes there's things that are like exigent circumstances. So even if they're doing what they feel is the correct thing, they can justify it. Like someone swats you, for example. Like, are all those cops going to jail for like doing the worst thing imaginable, like the most amount of force, like aggravated breaking and entering, and like, you know, just like hostage taking, kidnapping, all these different charges, right? Like 30 different charges each officer, you know, commission of a felony, you know, all these different legal terms, right? No, of course not, because they have qualified immunity. Now, people calling for the end of qualified immunity are calling for police reformation, and if they knew what they actually were calling for, they'd call it that, but they're not. They're leftists. They're trying to just destabilize the system, which kind of makes some sense to put as a point of contention forward that like we probably should reform the way that some police departments are operated. And there needs to be more training. It doesn't necessarily even have to be nationalized. It's just they need to be aware of it, and there could be nationalized training. There's definitely national trainers. You know, there's attorneys who go out there and they teach the police, because sometimes the police just, they legitimately just don't know. Like, no one's ever come to their town, because it's actually kind of served them to just not check what the outside world is doing. Because for years, they can just chase people out of town, and that works really well for them and their benefactors, right? But then they throw Travis Hines out, right? And then it's like they have to hold emergency meetings, they gotta fire some people, they gotta have some news conferences, they gotta call people in the middle of the night, they gotta wake up all the lawyers. Like, it's an absolute disaster. It fills up all of their phone calls. It's an absolute total government DDoS, right? And the accountability is coming, right? It's coming to a theater near you, because the economic circumstances are going to get bad for so many people quickly that there's going to be more Travis Hines in a couple years. There's going to be a lot more of them, and they're going to band together, and they're going to know their rights, and the police aren't going to really be able to do much, and these camps are, you know, these autonomous zones are going to pop up, right? They won't be able to form their own courts, not that can hold the police accountable, but this is why I think it's funny, right? To pretend I'm from the future. Like, listen, I know you're about to start talking to me, and I'm going to listen, I'm going to hear you out. But then it's my turn to talk. Does that sound fair? And the cops will be like, yeah, no, you got to go, and I'll be like, I just told you, that's all I'm going to say. And then they'll talk. I'll just wait, I'll wait. And then when they're done, I'll say, okay, well, before I ask you any questions, I have to read you some rights, right, by law, because I'm investigating you. So at this point, you're, you know, I may not have the lawful jurisdiction to detain you under code of authority of law, but I'm investigating you, and I feel obligated to tell you that you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say could be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to have an attorney or supervisor present during your interactions with the public. You have the right at any time to stop answering questions and to get back in your car and go away. Like, I want to have like a reverse Miranda. Like, I think that'd be really funny. And I don't really want to ever actually have to use it. Like, the intention is not to spring the trap and be like, I'm not a reality TV show schizo. I'm an activist. And I think that the ability to have uncomfortable free speech needs to be held accountable when it actually matters. For example, say there's a closed door meeting, right? Do you as a press member know that they cannot preclude the press? Or do you think that you know? Because it's going to be the difference between you actually getting imprisoned and having to pay for it and having your life basically ruined, at least for a while, and potentially launching a career as a civil rights activist and defeating them like David versus Goliath, right? Because if you miss with that slingshot, then you do not blind the Cyclops. And that's kind of the hero's journey that I think a lot of us who are this kind of crazy are on in our heads. But I think that I'm different because I'm actually being marginalized and pressed out of existence, and I see that there's an application and a need, like there's a power vacuum behind holding school districts individually responsible for their transgender kids. Finding the parents who are transgender parents, well, and with transgender kids, and or with transgender kids, I should say, and figuring out how they treat those kids. Like I want to do studies, right? I want to like check in with them legitimately. Like, how are you doing? How have things changed? Can your kids spy? Like they may not be able to lawfully record, but say they have a disability, right? Are you going to tell them that they can't record their lectures, their teachers' lectures? Are you going to say that they can't have, but what if they're blind and they're deaf? So now we have to record the mouth? So you're telling me we can have a camera for this one student, but as long as it doesn't violate the rights of other students? So you're telling me that what we should do is we should just put masks on all the children to promote maximum privacy, allow all of them to record, but bring them in person? Well, why don't we just abolish school and work from home at that point? It's like, well, we're getting there. It was like that during COVID, and it proved that like the old system was broken. We didn't have to prove that the new system was better or could work just as well. That wasn't the point. It proved that the old system was broken. It doesn't matter what comes next. It doesn't have to be the stupid first draft. It was just when it shut down and was replaced with something even worse, the online school, the face-to-face like college nonsense, the Zoom calls, right? When that came to fruition, all it didn't improve anything. If anything, it made things worse, but it proved that after the old system shut down, that the old system was broken, because going back to it became unconscionable. It became irreconcilable with the state of reality. And it became pretty obviously institutional brainwashing, which it wasn't already. And in the places where it has returned to normalcy, it's only because there's a lot of money in propaganda and tooling against the citizenry. And, it's just how the system's always been. People want to return to normalcy. But I think that ship has sailed, and I think that where we're heading is Halloween culture all the time. And it's like, it isn't even that gender is abolished, right? Because that isn't really what it's about. It's not that gender is abolished. It's just that, like, the culture will adopt ways that, like, there are just some archetypes that people recognize as transcendent. Like, you wouldn't call Harry Potter a girl. If a boy dresses like Harry Potter, what are you going to say? Oh my God, she's so hot. Or are you going to say, he's hot? You have to go ask them. It's even funnier when it's the males who dress as female characters, and everyone gets so angry. They're like, you have to like whisper about it. They're like, don't talk about that. Don't fucking talk about that. Like, if that's your public school, right? If that's what your kids are being subjected to, imagine if that is your kid. How bad that's going to hurt them spiritually. Like, that's going to fuck them up, you know? And if that's what you want as an adult, well, there's a reason I'm becoming an activist. We'll be back to this. More perspective. It's not really my responsibility to tell you whether or not you can eat partridge berries, and I'm not going to show you me eating partridge berries because they're red, and I don't want to be responsible for anyone eating any red berries. That being said, this is partridge berry. The 2nd day of September, 2022. Albany's Rural Cemetery. Hi. Partridge berry. Ooh. I like how someone put looks like maybe even yarrow in it. I absolutely love when it's not mowed. This is eye height right here. This is like POV or my eyes. But like the grass is pretty tall. I love it. The natural meadow. I like the contrast of light and dark. It's probably a little more pronounced on the screen. Yeah, there we go. Sorry. Maybe someday in the future there won't be those annoying cars. But at least in this era, I've been misidentifying this as sow thistle, but apparently it's not. Apparently it's like fireweed it was called, or pilewort. And it's an Asteraceae, but I forget the lower classification. But I was just out here smelling things. And it smells so bad, like it's so bad. I always thought this was sow thistle because of the called, and this has been like 5 minutes now, so let me see if I can remember. My partner says it could be pronounced erectites, maybe. So like could be erectites horacifolius. I think I said it right, but I really don't know. Anyways, guys, thanks for joining. We're on our way out of the cemetery right now. Dog.exe was just going nuts. I didn't film it. I gotta get back to recording my thoughts non-verbally into text. And we'll be back another time. Thanks for joining. I also meowed at the dog. It was funny.